Afternoon. Now, I'd like to address something that everyone here is getting confused with. Now, I've taught quite a lot of people in the last 6 or 7 years how to find that foundation stone in Melbourne and what it all means. And because most of you are stuck in law, you're not looking at the spiritual and the symbolism that's relative to that shrine. Now, I've had a long path. I recorded with a recording pen, a little pen I had in my top pocket with a camera in it, and was sent to jail for 86 days for recording my own case in one of their courtrooms, which demonstrates to you that justice just does not take place anymore. They're private buildings. So I've done a lot of hard yards, and I did go to jail for 86 days, and I did show not only a Catholic bishop but an Anglican bishop as well how to link that Bible to that shrine and how to make those claims. They're not easy claims to make. And I've taught quite a lot of people in the last 6 or 7 years how to make half of those claims. Your country was occupied. The king was taken off a throne in 1936, and they removed the succession of that king. And King George VI sat under a different coat of arms and handed that through to Queen Elizabeth II, who then sat under that coat of arms with a different crown. So a slow shift from the old to what you have now. And none of you, like absolutely zero of you, are looking at the claim that was actually made through gods and your Anzac and the blood that was spilt, and the reason you can make that claim through a shrine in Melbourne, which is in a king's domain. Might it be because somebody already made a claim and defined rule of law in front of an establishment that then went silent because that had occurred? That you don't think about these things. Now, God gave you all a right to stand up in your own houses, the House of Spires, the house of whatever your family name is. So Stephen, son of Peter, of the House of Spires. And you have a right to remove yourself from the slavery that this system is, not only under international law, but through the biblical teachings of Scripture, to bring you to a point where you do rule your own house and become the head of your family. This is what this government is removing from you. This Family Law Act 1975 directly introduced the power over the family estate as a guardianship. Okay, and this has been increased. So the power of the executor of the family estate gets removed. And this is where glossa is capite, means head. Okay, so capitis dominitio is the diminished rights. So your rights as the head of your house, under your family name, through your coat of arms and your lineage, your history, ancestry, it's been taken from you. You're being given this person instead. So I think there's a lot of confusion going on here. Some of you think you can be kings of your own right without knowing those stories and being able to lay those foundations from Melbourne all the way into Canberra. I don't think many of you are even aware of the fact that there are foundations laid along the storyline. So here you've taken half knowledge and run off with ego, thinking that you can be this king, which is a fast track to mental health. Right? You can ask the Director of Security at Cessnock Jail about all of that in relation to Steve. Steve stood his ground and proved his right and showed them the path to that shrine, specifically in the Bible storyline. And I'm telling you that I haven't met another soul There are a couple of you that are getting close, but I've not met very many of you that are willing to put the hard yards in to discover what the route into that shrine actually is, and what is defended there to hold a rule of law so that you can all stand up as heads of your houses. Okay, you are a kingdom without a king, which means that you've lost your head as a body. And another head's come along and said, oh, poor little child, you need some help. I'll be your head for a while. And the body never grew up. It never appointed a new head. It never discovered the lineage that your Anzac laid down. It never discovered the foundations that sat to define a realm separate from all other realms. And this is the difficult thing to convey to you. Yes, it's knowledge, and it's not in law. You are all looking in law for that answer that you're not going to find there, because it's spiritual. It's the simplicity of your heads of houses standing united in alliance. It's that simple. But you want to break it down into this subordination of state, to define your way out of state. That's showing the state that you haven't grown up, because you're not standing outside of it in the heads of your houses, defined by gods, in a line of authority given to you by a king. And that's the unfortunate thing. You're all expecting to vote for something that's defended. While you're sitting there contemplating voting for it, you're not defending it. So you're not standing with those men that discovered the rule of law that's linked to that shrine that defines a line of authority. Right? That line of authority defines rule of law for all of you, common law. Now that's what I explained to you before with your common law courts. So I'd like you to really think now that a country was forged and anchored in a realm, and that realm was anchored from the heavens by a king. And that king stood there in defense of the faith that your Anzac created it at that shrine, the realm itself. And if you aren't all standing up and defending it, then it doesn't exist lest you forget. And if you forget to stand up and defend it, it'll be gone, lest you forget. Now, in 1967, a foreign power came into your country and started running your government. So they aren't your Anzac, they're a foreign power running your government. So anything you do is trading with an enemy, isn't it? So go back to the Trading with the Enemy Act 1947, which was installed just before the IMF was installed. They were preparing to set up so that you could trade with the enemy. That's the bottom line. So while you all sit there not wanting to get rid of this person and wealth bucket, that doesn't really mean anything, because all the wealth you have is around you with your family anyway, and the land underneath your feet is only raidable because a foreign power is here, and you fail to stand up in loyalty with each other. You're all playing this game trying to be something that doesn't exist in law, in a foreign power, by an act of submission. So are you submitting to a foreign power by an act of submission, or are you standing up in self-determination with your red ensign and being a people through a king who sealed a foundation at law that a government can't rebut? Now, I'm hearing more stories that some of you are being hassled by, the persons unit, fixated persons unit, sorry. Skip my mind there, I'm not fixated on it. The fixated persons unit is ringing a few people saying they are wrong. Well, I've been waiting for a phone call from the whole entire body of the country from the Prime Minister, Governor General, Attorney General, National Security, Anti-Terrorism, Chief Justices, Attorney Generals of State, Governors of State. I mean, the list goes on. Commanders, Police Commissioners. How many more of you are just going to go silent when Steve walks in the room? Steve gets on the phone. Steve raises his voice. Is it because you all know that Steve discovered the line of authority that sits in that shrine? Not only that, walked that path himself all the way through Eden into Canberra. So I went through the Garden of Eden, looked around, drove the whole path. Okay, I've done most of the Prince's Highway around the country. So I've driven that path all the way into the Hall of Memory, where you're supposed to remember, lest you forget. So that's my message right now. Is there are a lot of you that are halfway there, believing you don't need to stand in loyalty to king and country. But your right through God is sealed through king and country, because that king holds the law your Anzac left in the temple for you to follow. He's the executor of the whole estate that you're beneficiaries of. So without him, what rule of law do you have defined that's sealed to a stone in a shrine, linked to a Garden of Eden all the way into Canberra? You don't. And this is where the police will have one over you, because you haven't discovered that shrine complete. My paperwork goes into lineage and just demonstrates the loss of your country through financial borrowing and war. But it's you as a people that are disloyal to your country. You all fly a blue ensign thinking that that's Australia. It's not. It's an administration. It's not your Commonwealth. They're not your Prime Minister, not your Attorney General. Foreign rule of law. So if you can't stand loyal, if you can't see the lineage given to you, the line of authority from those Anzac into that shrine anchored by a king to give you what is common, if you go and look at the scheduled oath to the Constitution Act, you'll see it's to a monarch. Okay, so you're tying yourself to a realm of God through an oath to a king. And that king upholds the word of God for all of you. That's the rules. Okay, your kingdom was occupied and a king was taken off his throne and a queen was put on her throne under a foreign crown. And that's coming to an end. Administration. Another video altogether. But this is about loyalty. So, another thing I'd like you to look at. President Trump is an administrator. It's his administration. Okay, he follows in the footsteps of Abraham Lincoln, who emancipated the slaves during a civil war. Okay, so in any state that he entered that included slavery, he emancipated those slaves. Now, in America right now, you have all these governors that look after citizens. Citizens are slaves. They're on the bonds market, allowing these governors to trade internationally for borrowed funds. Trump has warned these governors that if they don't clean up their cities, Trump will have to send the military in to clean up those cities for them. For them. So you can see a similar situation in the United States, in that the states hold the people as citizens, birth records. And Trump sits in a position of emancipation to those that don't want to be in slavery, those that return to God, basically. Now, we just discussed this. In 2018, Trump got up on an international stage and talked about self-determination in front of the whole United Nations. So out of his 38-minute speech, go and listen to the last 20 minutes. And you'll get the idea that you're supposed to stand up in your godly fashion, loyal to your country, so that you can be a self-determined people and not have to play this war game that everyone's playing worldwide. And this applies to every single country around the world. So when these cities in America went into looting, All that proved to President Trump as an administrator was that he needed to remain, because that city isn't self-determined, is unable to look after itself. It needs the citizenship, and the governors will look after the citizens with policy enforcement because they asked for the help. And Trump is saying stand up and grow out of needing the help and come back to a federal level. And the people aren't seeing this. It applies to Australia, it applies to New Zealand, it applies to Canada, it applies to almost every crown country around the world, including England. So, something to look at. Your loyalty allows them to push these burdens of warfare. Disloyalty, allows them to push these burdens of warfare on you. Your disloyalty, your want to play citizenship, your inability to get up, stand up for your rights, your inability to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. You don't think. And then the Beatles told you, they say, I want a revolution. Well, you know, you can count him out because he doesn't revolt. Give peace a chance was the message there. So might you be missing something? Stepping out of a ward state back to your federal, giving up all of the name so that you don't need to be nannied by the state, and standing united with God, where God said, where two or three of you stand together, God is with you. So all you need is your witnesses to define the realm where God exists and he is with you. And this government can't argue. You stand with gods in realms of men. So my question is, to be men, you need a king. That's funny, but it's true. To be sovereign, to have a garden, which your Anzac gave you and placed you into. To have a garden of which man is placed into. The garden must exist first, right? So what did your Anzac do at the Treaty of Versailles? Did they seal a border in international law? Safety and security of a garden to put men into, in the image of the Anzac? Are you in their image, or are you wearing a foreign St Edward's crown on your shoulder and using their RBA money and using their name every day and submitting to a foreign power and writing documents in acts of submission and sharing patents and sharing your technical secrets? Are you trading with an enemy? Are you belligerent because you trade with an enemy? Do you see your loyalty is very important? Okay, without it, you don't go home. Without you standing together in the voice of God, that realm doesn't exist. You need to speak it in defense of each other by raising a red flag and rendering unto Caesar everything that is Caesar's. Right? It doesn't mean going and putting in paperwork and submitting in acts of submission that you're something. It means growing up and realizing that it's behind you. Burn it, destroy it. And then second to that, the biggest thing that's going to make a change in your entire country is realizing that an oath to a king is what seals you outside of a foreign power's rule of law. If you don't want to be under a foreign power's rule of law, you need a head of your estate in which to take an oath to, so you can be in that line of authority instead of the occupier's line of authority. Without that oath, you cannot say that you are outside of their realm, unless you stand in a courtroom and prove that you are able to seal that stone in the ground in Melbourne. And that is not an easy task. You're up against mental health, you're up against the police, you're up against a lot of things. Okay, and that will take you many months, many years, and you've run out of that time to do this as a country. And that's honest truth. So you could find a king, put him on that throne. You could all take an oath to him. You could all stand up loyal with your flag. You could all ditch the blue flag. You could all ditch the oath to that queen. You could all start obeying the laws of your commonwealth and standing loyal as a people. Only that will bring you out of the current laws of war. Go back to Trump at the United Nations telling you to become a self-determined people. It's up to you. It's up to all of you to stand up and be loyal and take oath as per the schedule of the Constitution, so that you may stand in that Constitution again that was sealed for you at a shrine and re-upheld in law by a lot of effort from quite a few people. Do you stand and defend, or do you argue over what's happening? Do you stand and defend and take oath and bring back king country? Do you stand in God's rule, who told you to be heads of your own houses, take alliances with each other, appoint lords, and manage your own towns and cities? Or are you just going to let this foreign administrator continue to do what it's doing at a point where you owe it so much money that its only choice now is to increase the police on your streets and start pushing you and 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 pushing you, because all you've got left is your sweat labour to pay those debts. That's it. You ain't got no electricity grids, railways, land, titles, anything anymore. All you've got is the sweat off your backs to pay those debts. So you watch the police increase. You watch the states increase the fees, charges, levies, rates, etc. on you. Because that's the only way they can keep the machine running now, is by your full sweat labour, and you're asking for it. Because you don't want to step out of slavery, which Trump has protected you from, right? He still emancipates the slaves over time. You choose. You emancipate yourself from the mental slavery, and you stand up for your rights, which God gave you the right to do through God, King and country, or you remain slave to this ship, who will push the burden of warfare on you harder and harder and harder and harder. I'm still waiting for them to respond. Not one of them. So I know what they're waiting for is that time when you tell them, speak to Steve. That's what I'm waiting for, because none of them will talk to me. They all go silent. So I don't know what to do, except get you guys to stand up and realise you are the heads of your houses, but your country allows that. Your gods allowed that. Your Anzac allowed that, through a shrine anchored by a king, an executor to all of that for you. And if you can't put that executor in play and take oath to that executor and stand loyal in what your Anzac defined as law, then you're going to lose it all lest you forget. And that's basically what I need to say today. You got some of you wandering off saying, oh, don't disturb my colony. Well, your colony has what line of authority? It needs to be defined through God, King, Country in that shrine, doesn't it? And then you have some of you going off and pretending that you are kings of your own right. And I'm telling you now, mental health likes people like you, because what line of authority do you have sealed in the ground? Can you define this through those biblical standings? No, you can't. You haven't looked. You come from those law games straight into this and you think it's law. It's not. It's spirit. So, I'd like you to think, what is your line of authority if you don't have that king to hold that realm in play? Who holds the faith? Who defends it? Who stands with that man and defends it? Because if you don't all do that together, can it exist? Lest you forget. Sunset on a nation. Will the sun rise in the morning and will you remember them? Lest you forget. So, line of authority. It's got to come from somewhere. Look at Christian Porter. And his failed line of authority came from the Governor-General, didn't it? And that came from the Queen, didn't it? So start to look at reality, please. And the loyalty of you all standing together. You'd be surprised the power you've got, because they'll become war criminals because you stand under a peace treaty. You'd be surprised when you stand loyal. You'd be surprised when you stop worrying about the name. You'd be surprised when you start to actually defend what you have a right in international law. You'd be surprised how powerful you can all be. And that's without raising a gun. Hearts and minds. All right, see yous.